The rust was a screeching, grinding, olfactory assault on the senses. A floating shantytown cobbled together from the carcasses of decommissioned dreadnoughts and hollowed-out asteroids. It orbited the gas giant like a ring of debris that had gained sentience and decided to open a flea market. It smelled of ozone, frying grease, unwashed pressurized suits, and the metallic tang of desperate commerce. Jack stood amidst the throng of methane breathers and silicon-based traders, looking for all the world like a man who would rather be undergoing a root canal without anesthesia. He was carrying 3 heavy crates of recycled water filters, a bag of nutrient paste, and a strange, pulsating engine part that looked radioactive. He was the pack mule. It was the role he played best in public. Standing in front of him, negotiating with a 4-armed merchant whose skin secreted a slime that smelled faintly of ammonia, was Sari. To the untrained eye, she was just a felis, a feline humanoid species known across the sector for their agility, their vibrant green skin, and their bioluminescent markings that flared with their emotions. To the rich and bored of the core worlds, she was a status symbol, a pet to be displayed. To Jax, she was the only thing in the universe that made sense. 70 credits, the merchant spat, his lower mandibles clicking in agitation. And I am cutting my own throat at that price. This atmospheric scrubber is vintage, pre-war Federation tech. Sari leaned forward, her emerald eyes narrowing. The bioluminescent spots along her cheekbones dimmed to a skeptical cool blue. Her tail, long and sinuous, flicked lazily behind her, brushing against Jax's leg. Vintage? Sari asked, her voice a purr that vibrated with amusement. This is not vintage, my friend. This is a relic. The intake valve is calcified. If I install this on our ship, we will not be breathing clean air. We will be breathing history, and history smells like mold. She reached out, one clawed finger tapping the rusted casing of the device. 40 credits, and you throw in a new seal gasket, or I walk down the aisle to the Tellarite who is selling units that do not look like they were dredged from a swamp. The merchant threw 2 of his 4 arms up in exasperation. You rob me. You come here. You distract me with your eyes. And you rob me. 50, Sari countered, flashing a sharp, predatory smile that was entirely charming. And I will tell everyone that you are the most generous soul on the rust. Jax shifted his weight. The crate on his left shoulder was digging into a healed fracture from a job 2 years ago, but he kept his face impassive. He offered a small, apologetic shrug to the merchant, a silent communication that said, I just carry the heavy things, buddy. She runs the show. 55, the merchant grumbled, defeated by the Felis charm. Take it and go before I change my mind. Sari turned to Jax, her face lighting up literally with a warm, golden flush of triumph. See, I told you he was a sweetheart. Pay the man. Darling. Jack set the crates down with a heavy thud that rattled the deck plating. He fished a credit chip from his pocket, his movements slow and deliberate. You are terrifying when you shop, he murmured, his voice low and rough, like gravel tumbling in a mixer. I am efficient, she corrected, winking at him. Through bond the psychic neural link that connected their nervous systems, Jax felt a spike of pure affection from her, warm and sweet like honey. It washed over his mind, dulling the ache in his shoulder and the headache from the noise of the market. I love you, big man. Her thoughts whispered against his own. I know, he projected back, a steady, grounding presence. Now let us get this junk back to the ship before the gravity stabilizers fail again. They never got the chance. The explosion did not start with a sound. It started with a pressure wave. One moment, the air was thick with the noise of haggling and the hum of ventilation fans. Next, the atmosphere turned into a solid hammer. Jax felt it before he heard it, a sudden, violent compression of the air that popped his ears and slammed him backward into a stall selling dried lizard meat. Then came the roar, the hull of the station, 300 meters to their left, tore open like wet paper. A docking clamp had been breached. The scream of escaping atmosphere was deafening. a high-pitched shriek that drowned out the panicked cries of the crowd. "Jax!" Sari screamed, but he could barely hear her over the gale-force wind that instantly whipped through the promenade. Emergency bulkheads began to slam down, massive slabs of steel descending from the ceiling to seal off the breach, but they were old and slow. The suction was tremendous. Crates, merchandise, and smaller aliens were being dragged across the floor toward the gaping hole in the world that revealed the cold, unforgiving vacuum of space. Jax drove his boots into the deck grating. He reached out, his hand a blur of motion, and snagged Sari by the back of her flight jacket just as her feet lost purchase. He hauled her in, wrapping one massive arm around her waist and anchoring himself to a structural support pillar with the other. "Hold on," he roared, though the sound was snatched away by the wind. Then, as abruptly as it began, the wind stopped. The emergency force fields flickered to life across the breach, holding the remaining atmosphere in with a shimmering blue barrier. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the groans of the injured and the sparking of severed power cables. The artificial gravity generator, damaged by the blast, stuttered. The world tilted, then righted itself, then dropped to half capacity. Everyone felt light, their movements floaty and dreamlike. "Are you hurt?" Jax asked, scanning Sari for blood. "I am fine," she gasped, her ears pinned back against her skull in terror. "Jax, that was not an accident. That was a breach charge." Before he could process her words, the smoke cleared at the far end of the promenade. Shadows emerged from the haze. They were tall, encased in heavy void-black armor that absorbed the flickering emergency lights. They moved with the synchronized, mechanical precision of soldiers who had long ago forgotten the meaning of mercy. The Void Reapers. There were 6 of them. They carried compression rifles, weapons designed to rupture organs without piercing the hull of a ship. Leading them was a figure in command armor, distinguished by the jagged red trophies painted on his chest plate. "Secure the perimeter," the leader's voice boomed, amplified by his helmet speakers. It was a guttural, wet sound, characteristic of the saurian species. "The target is the Felice. Neutralize resistance. Ignore the trash." Jax felt Sari stiffen against him. The bond flared with ice-cold panic. "They are here for me." "Get behind me," Jax said. It was not a suggestion. He shoved Sari behind the pillar and stepped out into the open aisle. He had no weapon. He was wearing a grease-stained mechanic's jumpsuit and heavy magnetic boots. He looked like a laborer who had taken a wrong turn. The squad of mercenaries advanced, kicking debris and bodies out of their way. The leader, Corb, stopped 10 meters from Jax. His helmet faceplate retracted, revealing a snout scarred by plasma burns and yellow, slit-pupiled eyes that regarded Jax with the same interest a boot regards an ant. "Move, primate," Corb hissed, "unless you wish to be painted across the deck." Jax did not move. He stood with his feet shoulder-width apart, his hands hanging loose by his sides. To a casual observer, he looked relaxed. To a combat veteran, he looked like a coiled spring. "You are not taking her," Jax said. His voice was calm, cutting through the whimpers of the crowd. Corb laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. "A hero. How quaint. I did not know humans still had the spine for heroism. I thought you were all just labor." Corb gestured with 2 clawed fingers. "Take the female. If the ape interferes, gut him." 2 mercenaries stepped forward. Jax did not wait for them to close the distance. He moved. In the lower gravity, his speed was deceptive. He lunged, grabbing a heavy canister of pressurized coolant from a fallen stall. With a grunt of exertion, he hurled it. The canister spun through the air and struck the first mercenary in the helmet. The impact was sickening, a crunch of metal and reinforced glass. The mercenary staggered back, his sensors blinded. Jax closed the gap. He wasn't fighting with technique. He was fighting with the desperate, ugly violence of a street brawler. He drove his shoulder into the second mercenary's midsection, lifting the armored alien off his feet and slamming him into a wall. "Sari, run!" Jax shouted. But Sari could not run. A third mercenary had flanked them. firing a net launcher. The weighted mesh wrapped around her, shocking her with a paralyzing electric charge. She screamed a sound that tore through Jax's mind like a physical blade. Jax spun around, rage flaring in his eyes. He took a step toward her. But Corb was faster. The mercenary leader raised a heavy pistol, a plasma pulse cannon. He didn't aim for the head. He aimed for center mass. "Sit down, filth," Corb sneered. He pulled the trigger. The bolt of superheated energy hit Jax in the chest. It was like being kicked by a thruster engine. The kinetic force lifted Jax off his feet and hurled him backward, through the air, over the wreckage of the stalls. He crashed into a pile of industrial scrap metal, his body limp. As he landed, the unstable pile shifted. A steel support beam, dislodged from the ceiling by the earlier explosion, groaned and gave way. The massive girder, weighing easily 2 tons even in this gravity, crashed down on top of him. There was a cloud of dust, then silence. Jax. Sari's scream was raw, echoing in the physical world and shattering inside the psychic bond. Corb walked over to the pile of scrap. He scanned the wreckage with his thermal visor. He saw no movement. The human was buried under tons of steel. His chest cavity should have been crushed into paste. "Pathetic," Corb muttered. "Soft-skinned biology, no carapace, no redundant organs, just a bag of water waiting to be popped." He turned back to Sari. She was thrashing in the net, her eyes wide with horror, fixed on the spot where her husband had disappeared. "He is dead, little cat," Corb said, leaning down to look at her. "But you are very much alive, and worth a fortune in the core worlds." Sari lunged at him, teeth bared, her claws sparking against the net. Corb just sighed and nodded to his medic. "Sedate her. Heavy dose. I do not want to hear her whining about her dead pet for the entire trip." The medic jammed a pneumatic injector into Sari's neck. Her struggles ceased almost instantly. Her eyes rolled back, the vibrant green fading to a dull, sickly gray. Through bond, the connection to Jax went dark. It didn't snap. It just faded into a suffocating nothingness, like a radio losing signal in deep space. "Pack the cat," Corb ordered. "We leave. The local authorities will be here in 10 minutes, and I do not pay bribes if I do not have to." The Void Reapers moved out, carrying their prize. They left the ruin of the market behind them. They left the bodies. They left in silence. The silence of the Rust Belt was different from other silences. It was not peaceful. It was the silence of a graveyard after the mourners had gone home. The emergency fields hummed with a low, menacing buzz. The air scrubbers whined, trying to filter out the smoke and the smell of ozone. Minutes ticked by. The dust settled on the pile of scrap metal where Jax lay buried. Deep within the wreckage, in the dark, a finger twitched. Consciousness returned to Jax not as a flood, but as a system reboot. First came the taste: copper, iron, blood. He had bitten his tongue. Next came the assessment. He did not open his eyes. He lay perfectly still, letting his internal sensors run a diagnostic. The pain was there, a white-hot noise in his nervous system, but he compartmentalized it. He shoved the pain into a mental box labeled "Ignore" and focused on the damage. Ribs 3, 4, and 5 fractured, right lung bruised, capacity at 80%, sternum hairline fracture from plasma impact, thermal burns on the pectorals superficial. He was alive. Sorry. He reached out with his mind, searching for the familiar warmth of her presence. He found only static, a cold, empty void where she used to be. Panic flared for a microsecond, a biological imperative, but Jax crushed it. Panic burned oxygen. Panic wasted energy. He needed every calorie. He opened his eyes. Darkness. He was pinned. The weight pressing down on his chest was immense, a crushing pressure that made every breath a battle. The steel beam lay directly across his torso. "Okay," Jax whispered. His voice was a wet rasp. "Okay." He did not pray. He did not beg. He calculated. Gravity was at 0.5 standard. The beam weighed approximately 2 tons in standard gravity. Here, it was 1 ton. Still enough to kill a normal man. still enough to keep a normal species pinned until they suffocated. But humans were not a normal species. They were Deathworlders. They had evolved on a planet with crushing gravity, extreme temperature fluctuations, and predators that never stopped hunting. They were built of dense calcium and denser stubbornness. Jax placed his hands against the cold metal of the beam. He shifted his feet, finding purchase against a slab of bulkhead. He closed his eyes and visualized his adrenal glands. He commanded them to open the floodgates. Push. A low, guttural growl rose in his throat, vibrating through his chest. The muscles in his arms corded, bulging against the fabric of his jumpsuit. His triceps screamed. The fractures in his ribs ground together. A symphony of agony. He ignored it, slowly, agonizingly. The steel beam began to move. It lifted an inch, then two. Metal groaned against metal, screeching in protest. Jax gritted his teeth so hard a molar cracked. His vision swam with red and black spots. The capillaries in his eyes burst, turning the whites to crimson. With a final, explosive shout of effort, he shoved the beam upward and rolled his body to the right. The beam crashed back down, shaking the floor. But Jax was clear. He lay on the dirty deck plating, gasping for air. His chest heaved like a bellows. Sweat, mixed with blood and grease, poured off him, pooling on the floor. He lay there for exactly 60 seconds, forcing his heart rate to drop from 200 beats per minute to a sustainable 120. Then, he stood up. He swayed, caught himself on a piece of wreckage, and steadied. He spat a mouthful of bloody saliva onto the ground. He looked around the empty market. The Void Reapers were gone. Sari was gone. He limped toward where the mercenaries had stood. The ground was littered with debris. His boot crunched on something plastic. He knelt down. It was a comms unit, dropped by one of the soldiers during the scuffle. The casing was cracked, the power cell loose. Jax picked it up. His hands, large and scarred, moved with surprising delicacy. He popped the back panel open. The circuit for the audio receiver was severed. He looked around, spotted a shard of conductive foil from a wrapper of a protein bar. He picked it up, twisted it into a thin wire. He needed a binding agent, something wet to complete the circuit temporarily. He spat on the foil, human saliva full of electrolytes. He jammed the foil into the gap and pressed the power cell back into place. Static hissed from the tiny speaker. Then, a voice. "Hate this slime," a voice grumbled. It was Rick's, the mercenary technician. Jax recognized the whine. "The smooth-skinned monkey bled on my boot. Do you know how hard it is to get primate blood out of ceramic weave? It stains." "Shut up, Rick's," another voice answered. "Just get the engines prepped. Corb wants to warp as soon as we clear the mass shadow." "I am just saying," Rick's continued. "They are such messy creatures. Squishy, no armor. Why does anyone keep them as pets? They die if you poke them too hard." Jack stared at the device in his hand. His face was a mask of stone. Squishy. Die if you poke them. He crushed the comms unit in his hand, silencing the voice. He needed a ship, but first, he needed a tool. He scanned the wreckage of the vendor's stall. The water filters were smashed. The nutrient paste was splattered everywhere. But the heavy equipment. His eyes landed on a yellow industrial case half buried under the rubble. He pulled it free and popped the latches. Inside lay a portable plasma cutter. It was a heavy-duty mining tool, designed to slice through asteroid rock. The safety guard was broken off, and the handle was bent at an awkward angle. It was heavy, unbalanced, and dangerous to the user. Jax picked it up. He thumbed the ignition. A 3-inch blade of blue-white fire hissed to life, unstable and angry. It wasn't a weapon, it was a tool. But in the hands of a mechanic who had nothing left to lose, the distinction was irrelevant. Jax turned and walked toward the edge of the blast breach, where the force field kept the vacuum at bay. He looked out into the void. Far in the distance, a small point of light flared and stretched into a line, a ship entering warp. They were gone. They had a head start. They had military-grade weapons, heavy armor, and a ship designed for war. Jax had 3 broken ribs, a broken plasma cutter, and a rage that felt colder than the vacuum outside. He touched his chest, right over his heart, where the bond with Sari used to hum. Now, there was only silence. "You made a mistake, Corb," Jax whispered to the stars. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He smiled. It was not a nice smile. It did not reach his eyes. It was a baring of teeth, a primitive, atavistic signal that promised violence on a scale that could not be measured in credits or territory. "You forgot to check if the monkey was dead." Jax turned and began to walk toward the docking bays. He moved with a heavy, limping gait, but he did not slow down. He had work to do. The gilded cage was not designed for stealth, but for intimidation. It was a luxury cruiser retrofitted with military-grade plating and illegal weapon systems, a predator masquerading as a palace. Currently, it was cutting through the interstellar medium at sublight speeds, hugging the gravitational wake of a rogue moon to mask its ion signature from the Galactic Union long-range sensors. Inside the command deck, the air smelled of filtered ozone and the musky reptilian scent of satisfaction. Corb sat in his captain's chair, a throne of molded plasteel and leather, examining a glass of blue liqueur. He swirled the liquid, watching the light refract through it, before turning his slit-pupilled gaze to the expansive monitor displaying the cargo hold. "Look at it," Corb rumbled, his voice a deep baritone that vibrated in his chest. "A Felice, high-cast markings, genetic perfection." He gestured with the glass toward the screen where Sari sat, huddled in a containment cell made of reinforced hyperglass. And yet, she chose to mate with a dirt digger. A primate, it is like seeing a starship engine mounted on a garbage scow. It offends the aesthetic of the universe. His crew, a motley collection of mercenaries from the Outer Rim, chuckled nervously. They knew better than to interrupt Corb when he was philosophizing. In the containment cell, the world was a blur of white noise and throbbing headaches. The sedative was heavy, a chemical fog that tried to drag Sari back into unconsciousness, but she fought it. She was Felis. Her metabolism was faster than most, burning through the toxins with feverish intensity. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Her vibrant green skin was pale, the bioluminescent spots on her cheeks dimmed to a faint, sickly flicker. She felt hollow. The bond, the psychic neural link that connected her to Jax, had been silent for an hour. It was usually a warm hum in the back of her mind, a constant reassurance of his presence. Now, there was distance. Then, she felt it. It was faint at first, like a tremor in the ground from miles away. Thump. Sari froze, her ears twitching forward. She closed her eyes, blocking out the sterile white light of her prison, and focused on the void. Thump. It was not the erratic, fluttering panic of a prey animal. It was not the fast, aggressive tempo of a predator in a frenzy. It was slow. It was heavy. It sounded like a piston driving into a cylinder. It sounded like a forge hammer striking an anvil. Thump, thump, thump. A smile, small and terrifying, touched Sari's lips. Her eyes snapped open, and for a second, the bioluminescence flared bright emerald. "He is not dead," she whispered to the empty air of her cell. On the bridge, Rix, the ship's nervous technician, squinted at his sensor console. He tapped the screen with a clawed finger, then tapped it again harder. "Commander," Rix said, his voice rising in pitch. "I have a ghost contact on the rear sensors." Corb did not look up from his drink. "Space debris. Rix, we are flying through a gravity wake. There is always debris." "It is moving against the drift, sir," Rix insisted, his antenna quivering. "It is small, minimal mass, no warp signature. It looks like scrap metal." "Scrap metal does not move against the drift," Corb snapped. "Put it on the main screen." The view of the starfield shifted. A magnified image appeared in the center. It was a pod, but it was barely recognizable as a spacecraft. It looked like a standard-issue escape pod that had been stripped down to its frame, then bolted to an engine that was 3 times too large for its chassis. It was an ugly, asymmetric lump of welded iron and fury, trailing a plume of dirty ion exhaust. "What is that?" Corb asked, leaning forward. "It is a modified Class 4 lifeboat," Rix analyzed, his fingers flying across the keypad. "But the safety limiters have been removed. The engine is running at 300% capacity. The structural integrity is failing." Rix paused, a look of genuine confusion crossing his insectoid features. "Sir, thermal scans show a biological entity inside, but the internal temperature of that pod is 50 degrees Celsius and rising. The cooling system is dead." 50 degrees, Corb scoffed. "Nothing survives that. The brain cooks." "There is more," Rick said, looking nauseous. "The entity, it is leaking. The cabin is filled with moisture. It is excreting liquid from its entire surface area." Corb laughed, a cruel, dry sound. "It is melting. The soft-skinned idiot is boiling himself alive in a tin can just to chase us. He is terrified. That is the sweat of a dying animal." "It is disgusting," Rick shuddered. "He is marinating in his own fluids." "Let him burn," Corb dismissed, waving a hand. "He cannot catch us. We are engaging the sublight drive. Increase speed to 0.5. "Sir," Rix interrupted, his voice trembling. "He is not chasing us. He is intercepting." On the screen, the ugly little pod did not slow down. It fired its maneuvering thrusters a violent, uncontrolled burst that should have sheared the wings off. The pod slammed into a trajectory that would intersect with the gilded cage. Inside the pod, Jax was not thinking about the heat. He was strapped into the pilot's seat with duct tape and cargo webbing because the safety harness had been too small for his chest. The air inside the pod was a sauna. Sweat ran down his face in rivulets, stinging his eyes, soaking his torn jumpsuit until it clung to his skin like a second layer. The heat warning light was flashing red on the dashboard. He smashed it with his fist. "Come on," Jax gritted out through clenched teeth. The G-force meter was buried in the red. He was pulling 9 Gs. His vision was tunneling, gray vignettes encroaching on the edges of his sight. His heart was hammering against his bruised ribs, each beat a fresh explosion of pain. But he did not slow down. Humans were persistence hunters. They were the only species in the galaxy that cooled themselves by sweating, allowing them to run while other species had to stop and pant. They could dump heat while moving. They could suffer longer than anything else. "Target distance 200 meters, the computer voice droned. "Collision imminent." "No collision," Jax growled. "Docking." He didn't have a docking computer. He had eyes and hands. He gripped the manual control stick, fighting the vibration that threatened to rattle his teeth out of his skull. The gilded cage loomed ahead, a massive fortress of gray metal. Jax fired the retro rockets. The deceleration force was brutal. It slammed him forward against the straps, squeezing the air out of his damaged lungs. Blood sprayed from his nose, splattering the console. The pod skidded sideways. Jax triggered the magnetic clamps he had welded to the landing struts. Clang! The sound vibrated through the hull of the pod. The magnets engaged, locking onto the outer skin of the mercenary ship with the force of a car crash. The pod groaned, metal twisting, but it held. Jax gasped, sucking in the superheated air. He wiped the blood from his upper lip with the back of his hand. "Boarding complete," he wheezed. He unbuckled the straps. He grabbed the yellow industrial case containing the plasma cutter. He kicked the hatch of the pod open. Below him was the hull of the gilded cage. Above him was the infinite, indifferent void. Jax magnetized his boots. He stepped out of the pod and onto the enemy ship. He activated the plasma cutter. The blue blade hissed to life. He knelt down and drove the blade into the hull plating. Inside the ship, the alarms screamed. "Hull breach!" Rix shrieked. "Sector 4. He is cutting through." Corb stood up, his tail lashing behind him. "Impossible. The radiation alone should have killed him. Send the EVA team. Get 2 heavy guards out there. Scrape that bug off my ship." 2 airlocks cycled open on the dorsal ridge of the ship. 2 massive figures emerged, clad in powered void armor. They were Grox-born mercenaries. creatures of muscle and bad temper, carrying heavy kinetic rifles. Jack saw them coming. He stopped cutting. He looked at his oxygen gauge. 20 minutes of air, but his suit was damaged. The heater was broken. The cold of space was already seeping in, gnawing at his extremities. Good. Jax reached up and deactivated his life support system. The fans stopped. The CO2 scrubbers went silent. The suit's thermal signature dropped until he was just another piece of cold metal in the dark. He clicked his comms off. He became a ghost. The two guards floated across the hull, their magnetic boots thumping rhythmically. They swept their rifles back and forth, their helmet lights cutting through the darkness. "Where is he?" the first guard asked. "Over the open channel." "I lost the thermal lock." "Probably froze to death," the second guard laughed. "Stupid primate turned off his heater." Jax lay flat against the hull, wedged behind a radar dish. He was shivering violently, his body temperature dropping, but his mind was crystal clear. The cold numbed the pain in his ribs. The first guard walked past the radar dish. Jax moved. He did not stand up. He grabbed the ankle of the guard with one hand, with the other. He swung a heavy, solid steel wrench he had taken from the pod. In zero gravity, mass was the only thing that mattered. Jax anchored himself with his magnetic boots and torqued his entire body. The wrench struck the guard's faceplate. There was no sound in the vacuum, no crunch, just the vibration traveling through Jax's arm and the sudden spiderweb of cracks appearing on the guard's visor. The guard flailed, panic seizing him as the vacuum began to hiss into his helmet. Jax didn't finish him. He didn't have to. He pushed the guard away, sending him spinning off into the void. A flailing star of panic. The second guard spun around, raising his rifle. He fired. A kinetic slug sparked off the hull inches from Jax's head. Jax didn't return fire. He didn't have a gun. He had a spool of high-tensile towing cable clipped to his belt. He pushed off the hull, diving low. He slid between the guard's legs, the magnetic boots sparking as he skated across the metal. As he passed, he hooked the carabiner of the cable onto the guard's life support pack. Jax kept sliding toward the edge of the ship where the exhaust vents were located. The guard turned to shoot, but Jax had already reached the vent. He clipped the other end of the cable to a heavy grating. Then, Jax kicked the guard in the chest. The guard floated backward, drifting away from the hull. The cable went taut. The guard hung there, tethered like a balloon. He struggled, trying to pull himself back, but he had no leverage in the void. Jax walked over to the tether point. He looked at the guard, who was screaming silent curses inside his helmet. Jax raised the plasma cutter. He didn't cut the cable. He cut the air hose connecting the guard's tank to his helmet. A cloud of crystallized oxygen erupted from the hose. The guard convulsed, clutching at his throat, thrashing against the uncaring backdrop of the nebula. Jax turned away. He didn't watch the end. It was just mechanics. A machine needs fuel. Take away the fuel. The machine stops. He walked back to the hole he had started cutting. He finished the circle. He kicked the plate in. The atmosphere from inside the ship vented out in a violent rush. Then the emergency seal activated. Jax dropped through the hole before the seal closed. He landed in a maintenance corridor. Gravity returned. Slamming into him, he hit the floor hard, rolling to absorb the impact. The airlock cycle hissed. The atmosphere flooded back into the small chamber. Jax ripped his helmet off. He gasped, sucking in the stale, recycled air of the ship. It tasted like hydraulic fluid and fear. He slumped against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor. He was a wreck. His lips were blue from the cold. His knuckles were split and bleeding. His left shoulder, the one that had taken the brunt of the pod's deceleration, was dislocated. It hung at a sickening angle. "Okay," he whispered. "Assessment." He needed that arm. He grabbed his left wrist with his right hand. He braced his back against the bulkhead. He closed his eyes and thought of the first time he met Sari. It had been on Titan Station. He was working a double shift in the lower decks, fixing a turbine that 3 other mechanics had given up on. He was covered in grease, invisible to the shiny, high-caste species walking past on the upper promenade. Sari had stopped. She wasn't looking at the view. She was looking at him. She had climbed down the ladder, ruining a silk dress that cost more than Jack's made in a year, and handed him a cup of stimcaf. "You look like you're holding up the whole station," she had said. "Someone has to," he had replied, too tired to be polite. "Then I will sit here," she said, sitting on a dirty crate. "And make sure you do not fall." She had been his wall ever since. "And now," Jax growled, opening his eyes, "I am coming to get you." He took a deep breath. He screamed a short, sharp bark of agony and slammed his shoulder back into the socket. The pain was blinding. It turned the world white for 3 seconds. When his vision cleared, he was panting, sweat dripping from his nose. He rotated the arm. It clicked. It hurt, but it worked. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pouch of nutrient paste. He squeezed the gelatinous sludge into his mouth, swallowing it without tasting. It was fuel, nothing more. He stood up. He picked up the plasma cutter. He picked up the heavy wrench. He walked to the inner door of the airlock. He punched the override code he had learned from stripping 3 ships of this exact class in the scrapyards. The door hissed open. Jack stepped into the corridor. It was empty. The red emergency lights were rotating, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. Above him, in the corner of the ceiling, a security camera swiveled to face him. The lens focused, the aperture contracting like a surprised eye. Jack stopped. He looked directly into the camera. He knew Corb was watching on the bridge. He knew the lizard was safe behind 3 inches of blast-proof steel. Laughing, thinking this was a game, Jax did not speak. He raised his hand. His fingers were stained with grease and blood. He held up 3 fingers, 3 decks. He folded 1 finger down, 2 decks. He folded the second finger down, 1 deck. He left 1 finger pointing at the camera. Then, he curled it into a fist. He turned and walked down the corridor. He didn't run. He walked with the heavy rhythmic gait of a predator that knows the prey has nowhere to go. Thump, thump, thump. His boots on the metal deck matched the heartbeat Sari felt in her cell. The hunt was over. The slaughter was about to begin. The silence on the bridge of the gilded cage was not the disciplined silence of a military vessel. It was the nervous, brittle silence of a crew that realized they were no longer the predators. Corb stood by the tactical console, his claws drumming a jagged rhythm against the plasteel. The external monitors showed nothing but the endless, uncaring starfield and the faint, shimmering distortion of the ship's own ion wake. The 2 guards he had sent out for the extravehicular activity were gone. Their biosigns had flatlined not simultaneously, which would suggest an explosion, but sequentially, one, then the other. "Status," Corb barked, his voice tight. "No response from the EVA team, Commander," the communications officer reported. He was a Vanoid, his feathers ruffled in agitation. "And, Commander, I am reading a pressure fluctuation in airlock 3. Someone cycled through the inner door." Corb spun around, his tail lashing behind him like a whip. "He is inside." "Impossible," Rick squeaked from the engineering station. "The airlock requires a biometric key or a command code. A primate mechanic cannot just—" "He is inside," Corb roared, slamming his fist onto the console. The impact made the crew flinch. "Lock down the corridors. Seal the blast doors between the maintenance sector and the bridge. I want a full sweep. Rix, take Squad Beta. Go down there and flush him out." Rix looked at Corb with wide, multifaceted eyes. "Me? But I am a technician, sir. I fix the toaster. I do not hunt Deathworlders." "You know the ship's layout," Corb hissed, leaning down until his snout was inches from Rix's face. "Take the heavy guards. Find him. Kill him, or I will feed you to the engine recyclers piece by piece." Rix gulped, a visible ripple passing down his throat. "Squad Beta. On me. We are going hunting." As Rix and 4 heavily armored mercenaries exited the bridge, Corb turned back to the screen showing the cargo hold. Sari was sitting cross-legged in her cell. She was not looking at the door. She was looking up at the ceiling, a small, serene smile playing on her lips. "Why are you smiling?" Corb muttered, a cold knot forming in his stomach. "Your husband is trapped in a metal box with 20 armed killers." Jax was not trapped. He was commuting. To a soldier, a starship is a series of corridors, kill zones, and cover points. To a passenger, it is rooms and hallways. But to a structural engineer, a ship is an organism. It has a skeleton of durasteel beams, a nervous system of fiber optic cables, and a circulatory system of ventilation shafts and maintenance crawl spaces. Jax was currently crawling through the ship's aorta. The main power conduit tunnel ran the length of the ship, situated between the deck plating of Level 2 and the ceiling of Level 3. It was a cramped, hot, claustrophobic nightmare of high-voltage cables and steam pipes. The air here was thick with the smell of ozone and hydraulic grease, a scent that Jax found strangely comforting. It smelled like work. He dragged himself forward on his elbows. His dislocated shoulder throbbed with a dull, sickening ache, but the adrenaline flowing through his system kept the pain distant, like a radio playing in another room. He reached a junction box labeled Main Distribution Node Sector 4, Living Quarters and Cargo. Jax rolled onto his back. He pulled the heavy wrench from his belt. He didn't smash the box. That would trigger a tamper alarm. Instead, he used the flat end of the wrench to unscrew the maintenance panel with precise, rapid movements. Inside, a maze of crystal fuses glowed with a soft blue light. "Let us turn down the lights," Jax whispered. He didn't cut the wires. He bridged the connection between the primary lighting circuit and the emergency alarm relay using a piece of copper wire he had stripped from a dead drone in the airlock. Zap! A spark jumped, stinging his fingers. Instantly, the ship changed. The hum of the main reactor dropped an octave. The sterile, white LED strips that illuminated the corridors flickered and died. For a second, there was total darkness. Then, the emergency backup kicked in. Crimson light bathed the ship. Revolving warning beacons began to spin, casting long, rotating shadows that stretched and contracted like breathing monsters. The air scrubbers slowed down, leaving the air still and heavy. Jax smiled in the dark. Humans had poor night vision compared to many species, but they understood the psychology of fear better than anyone. Red was the color of blood. Red was the color of danger. He was painting their world in violence before he even touched them. He slotted the panel back into place and continued crawling. He was heading for the ventilation exchange above Corridor B7. He knew Rix would come that way. It was the only direct route from the bridge to the airlock. Rix hated the red light. It made everything look wet. "Stay close," Rix whispered, clutching his pulse pistol with 2 trembling hands. "Formation. Watch the vents. Watch the floor. Just watch everything." Behind him, 3 massive Grox mercenaries lumbered forward. They were 7 feet tall, covered in thick gray hide that could stop a small-caliber bullet. They wore tactical goggles that glowed green in the gloom. The 4th member of the squad was a sniper from the aviary worlds, perched nervously at the rear. "I can't see heat signatures," the sniper complained, tapping his visor. "The pipes in the walls are running hot." He must have bypassed the thermal insulation. The whole corridor looks like a Christmas tree. "He is blinding the sensors," Rix whimpered. He knows we are looking." They reached a junction. To the left was the mess hall. To the right was the cargo bay access. "Clear left," one of the Grox grunted, stepping forward. As the Grox took a step, his heavy boot landed on a tripwire. It was not a high-tech laser tripwire. It was a length of high-tensile fishing line, strung ankle-height across the floor, painted black with grease. Snap! The wire pulled the pin on a canister taped to the ceiling. It wasn't a grenade. It was a fire suppression cylinder chemical foam designed to starve a fire of oxygen instantly. Hiss! A massive cloud of white, opaque foam exploded into the corridor, filling the space from floor to ceiling in seconds. "Ambush!" the Grox roared, firing blindly into the foam. Blue plasma bolts streaked through the white cloud, hitting the walls and ceiling, scorching the metal but hitting nothing alive. "Hold fire, you morons!" Rick screamed. coughing as the chemical taste filled his mouth. "You will puncture the hull." In the chaos, the white foam swirled. Visibility was reduced to zero. The sniper at the back of the formation took a step backward, trying to get clear of the cloud. He backed right under a large ventilation grate in the ceiling. Jax was waiting. He had removed the screws of the grate 5 minutes ago. He lifted the grate silently. He hung upside down, his legs hooked around a support pipe, his blood rushing to his head. He reached down. The sniper felt a hand close around his helmet. Before he could shout, he was yanked upward with terrifying speed. Clang! The grate slammed back into place. "Tile?" Rix called out, waving his hand to clear the foam. "Tile, report." There was no answer. Just a wet, sickening crunch from above the ceiling tiles, followed by the sound of a heavy object being dragged across metal. "He is in the ceiling," the Grok's leader shouted, aiming his rifle up. "Don't shoot the ceiling!" Rix shrieked, grabbing the gun barrel. "There are fuel lines up there. You want to blow us all to vapor." Silence returned to the corridor. The foam began to settle, leaving a slippery white residue on the floor. Tile was gone. There was no blood, no body, just an empty space where a soldier had stood 10 seconds ago. "We need to move," Rick said, his voice trembling so hard his mandibles clicked together. "We need to get to the open area, the cargo bay. He cannot hide in the cargo bay." They moved faster now, their discipline fraying. They were bunching up, seeking comfort in proximity, which was exactly what Jax wanted. "I heard stories about humans," one of the Groks whispered to the other as they walked. "I heard they have venom sacs in their teeth." Rix, despite his terror, let out a hysterical giggle. "Venom? No, you idiot. They are not vipers. They are worse." "What is worse than venom?" "Bacteria," Rix said, his eyes darting to every shadow. "Their mouths are filthy. They have millions of microorganisms living in their saliva. If a human bites you, you do not die instantly. The wound festers. It turns green, then black. You get a fever. Your organs shut down one by one. It takes 3 weeks to die." The Groks shuddered, gripping his rifle tighter. 3 weeks, that is unnecessary. That is cruel. "They are Deathworlders," Rix whispered. "Cruelty is their evolutionary baseline." Suddenly, the ship's public address system crackled to life. Every speaker in every corridor, every cabin, and every cell turned on. But there was no voice, no "surrender now," no "I am coming for you." There was a sound. Thump, thump, thump. It was a heartbeat. Slow, heavy. It sounded wet and biological, amplified 1,000 times until it felt like the ship itself had grown a heart. Thump, thump, thump. "Turn it off." Rix covered his ears, or the auditory holes where ears would be. "He is broadcasting his biorhythm. Why is he doing that?" In the cargo bay, Sari stood up. She walked to the glass of her cell. The 2 guards stationed outside were looking up at the speakers, their weapons raised, their nerves wire-tight. "You should run," Sari said. Her voice was soft, melodic, and terrifyingly calm. The guards spun around. "Quiet. Prisoner." Sari tilted her head. The teal bioluminescence on her neck pulsed in time with the sound over the speakers. "He does not like noise. He is focusing. When he gets like this, he finds loud things. Irritating." "Who is he?" the guard demanded, trying to mask his fear with aggression. "The mechanic." "He is not a mechanic right now," Sari whispered. "Right now, he is the thing that checks under the bed for monsters." Thump, thump. The lights in the corridor outside the cargo bay died completely. The red emergency rotators stopped. Total, absolute darkness. Rix and the 2 remaining Groks froze. "Night vision," Rix ordered. They tapped their helmets. The world turned into a grainy green phosphor. Jax was standing 10 feet in front of them. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't crouching. He was standing in the middle of the hallway, holding a fire axe he had taken from an emergency locker. He looked relaxed, almost bored. "Contact," the Grok screamed. They opened fire. Jax moved. He didn't run away. He ran forward. He slid on his knees across the floor, slick with the chemical foam from the earlier trap. The plasma bolt sailed over his head, scorching the air where he had been standing a millisecond ago. He closed the distance before they could adjust their aim. He swung the axe. He didn't use the blade. He used the handle. He drove the solid fiberglass shaft into the knee of the lead Groks. Crack! The sound of the patella shattering was louder than the gunfire. The Groks howled and collapsed. Jax used the falling body as a shield. He grabbed the Groks by the combat harness and shoved him into the second soldier. They tangled in a heap of limbs and armor. Rix was the only one left standing. He raised his pistol, his hands shaking so violently he couldn't align the sights. Jax looked at him. The human's face was smeared with grease and soot. His eyes were dark voids, reflecting the green glow of Rix's night vision. "Boo," Jax whispered. Rix dropped the gun. He didn't think so. He didn't fight. He turned and ran, scrambling over his fallen comrades, shrieking like a hatchling. Jax didn't chase him. He turned his attention to the two Groks on the floor. One was trying to stand on a broken leg. Jax stepped in, grabbed the soldier's rifle barrel, and twisted it out of his grip. He delivered a short, precise palm strike to the alien's throat. The Groks gagged and went limp, gasping for air. The second Groks roared and swung a massive fist. Jax ducked, weaving under the blow with the fluidity of water. He moved behind the alien, wrapped his arm around the thick, gray neck, and applied pressure. It was a sleeper hold. Simple, bloodless, efficient. "Go to sleep," Jax murmured into the alien's ear. "Dream of somewhere else." The Grok struggled for 6 seconds. Then, his weight became dead weight. Jax lowered him to the floor gently. He stood up in the dark corridor. Surrounded by the fallen squad, he checked his pulse. 110. Sustainable. He picked up Rix's dropped radio. "3 down," Jax said into the mic. "Plus the sniper. That makes 4. On the bridge, Korb stared at the audio visualizer. The heartbeat was still thumping over the speakers, a relentless drumbeat of doom. "He took out the squad," Korb whispered, disbelief warring with rage. "He took out a Groks assault team with a fire axe handle." He turned to his console, his claws flying across the interface. "Computer access the personnel file on the human prisoner. ID code from the tracker we found." The computer chirped. A holographic window opened. "Subject Jackson Vance. Species human origin. Mars colony. 4 occupation, terraformer engineer structural specialist." Korb read the file, his slit eyes narrowing. "A terraformer, a gardener, he builds greenhouses." He scrolled down. "Medical history. Multiple bone fractures, occupational. Toxin resistance class, 4. Warning, subject displays, class A. Adrenal capacity, note. Human physiology allows for hysterical strength episodes during extreme stress or pain. Subject can bypass skeletal safety limiters. Adrenal capacity." Korb spat. "What is that?" The medical officer, a cephalopod in a tank suit, bubbled a response. "It is a combat drug, Commander, but the humans produce it naturally. Internal glands. When threatened, they flood their system with it. It increases reaction time, dulls pain, and boosts muscle density output by 300%. Effectively, for short bursts, they become biological tanks." Korb stared at the screen. "You are telling me that we kidnapped the wife of a man who can turn himself into a monster at will." "Not at will, sir," the doctor corrected. "It is instinct. We triggered it," Korb snarled. "He is still just meat. He is flesh and bone. Where is he now?" The ship shuddered. It wasn't a vibration. It was a lurch. The artificial gravity fluxed, throwing Korb out of his chair. The lights on the bridge turned from red to a terrifying strobe. "Report," Korb screamed, scrambling to his feet. "Engineering," the comms officer yelled. "He is in the main drive chamber. He has... Oh, by the stars." What has he done?" "He didn't blow the engine," the officer said, his voice hollow. "He uncoupled the gyroscopic stabilizer. He manually unlocked the magnetic clamps on the flywheel. Corb felt the blood drain from his face. The flywheel was a 10-ton spinning magnet that kept the ship's warp core stable. If it was unbalanced, the ship is shaking itself apart, Corb realized. He is not trying to kill us. He is trying to shake us out of the sky. The ship lurched again, harder this time. A support beam on the ceiling buckled. Sparks showered down onto the command deck. The main screen flickered. The image of the starfield was replaced by text. It was a direct message, overridden from the engineering console. It was not a long message. It was simple. White text on a black background. Release her, or I will unbolt the gravity plating and let you all fall into the core. Corb stared at the message. His hands were shaking. He looked at the containment cell monitor. Sari was standing there, watching the camera. She gave a small, polite wave. Get me a channel to the engine room, Corb whispered. Now. Channel open, the officer said. Human, Corb said, trying to regain his command voice. This is Commander Corb. You are damaging a vessel worth 40 million credits. The response came back instantly. It was Jax's voice, amplified by the roar of the unstable engine behind him. Commander, Jax said. He sounded tired, but calm. I do not care about your ship. I do not care about your credits. I have a wrench, and I'm standing next to the only bolt keeping your reactor from going critical. There was the sound of metal screeching on metal, Jax tightening the wrench on a critical valve, threatening to snap it. You have 5 minutes, Jax continued. Open the cell, clear the corridor to the bridge, or I turn this ship into the most expensive firework in the sector. Corb looked at his crew. They were terrified. The myth of the superior predator had been shattered by a man with a wrench and a bad temper. And Corb, Jax added, his voice dropping an octave. What, Corb asked, if she has a single scratch on her? Jax said, I will not let the ship explode. I will stop the engine, and then I will come up there and find you. The connection cut. The heartbeat sound returned. Thump, thump, thump. Corb slumped back into his chair. The ship groaned around him, the metal crying out in protest. Unlock the cell, Corb whispered. Sir. I said unlock the damn cell, Corb roared. And get everyone to the bridge. We make our stand here. If he wants her, he has to come through the blast doors. On the monitor, the door to the glass cage slid open. Sari stepped out. She didn't run. She stood in the middle of the cargo bay, took a deep breath, and turned toward the engineering section. She began to walk. Corb pulled his heavy plasma pistol from his holster. He checked the charge. Come on, monkey, Corb hissed. Come and die. The blast door to the command bridge was a slab of reinforced titanium alloy, 4 inches thick, designed to withstand a direct hit from a ship-to-ship torpedo. It was locked with 12 magnetic bolts, each capable of holding back the vacuum of space. To the crew of the Gilded Cage, it was the ultimate barrier, the line that divided the living from the dead. But to a structural engineer with a hydraulic cargo loader and no regard for safety protocols, it was just a piece of metal with a yield point. Boom! The sound was not a knock. It was a tectonic shift. The entire bridge shuddered, dust raining down from the overhead conduits. Corb stood behind the captain's chair, his clawed hand gripping Sari's upper arm tight enough to bruise. He had dragged her up from the cargo bay the moment the gravity stabilizers had failed, realizing that his ship was no longer a fortress, but a trap. Now, she was his only shield. Hold the door. Corb screamed at his remaining men. Focus fire on the breach. There were 6 of them left. The elite, the survivors. They crouched behind overturned consoles and tactical barricades, their plasma rifles leveled at the denting metal. Among them was Grohl, a massive entity from the silica wastes of the outer rim, a stone man, his skin a living carapace of granite and crystal. Boom! The center of the blast door began to glow cherry red, not from heat, but from stress. The metal was being bent inward, stretching past its molecular limit. He cannot get in, Rix whimpered from under a desk, clutching a datapad like a holy relic. The hydraulics on a standard loader maximize at 5 tons. That door is rated for 50. "He is not pushing it," Sari whispered. Her voice was barely audible over the groaning of the ship. She wasn't looking at the door with fear. She was looking at it with a strange, terrifying anticipation. "He is finding the frequency." "Shut up," Korb hissed, pressing the barrel of his pistol against her temple. Boom. This impact was different. It hit the exact center of the resonance vibration caused by the previous blow. It was physics weaponized by a mind that saw the world in stress vectors and load-bearing equations. The titanium screamed. A hairline fracture appeared in the center, jagged and bright. Then, the door did not open. It exploded inward. The heavy slab of metal was ripped from its tracks, twisting like a piece of wet cardboard, and crashed onto the deck plates with a sound that deafened everyone in the room. Dust and smoke billowed out from the corridor, thick and choking, and from the smoke, the monster emerged. Jax was wearing the yellow chassis of a Class 4 industrial loader. It was a cage of hydraulic pistons and roll bars that wrapped around his torso and arms, terminating in two massive mechanical clamps. But it wasn't pristine. He had ripped the safety limiters off the engine block, and the exhaust ports on the back were spitting black, oily smoke. But it was the man inside the machine that froze the blood in Korb's veins. Jax's mechanic jumpsuit was shredded, hanging in tatters around his waist. His upper body was exposed, a map of violence. Cuts from the ventilation shafts crisscrossed his chest. Burns from the plasma leaks in the engine room seared his left side. He was covered in a slurry of hydraulic grease, sweat, and the violet blood of the Grok squad he had dismantled in the hallway. He took a step. The deck plates groaned under the weight of the loader. His face was unrecognizable. The human eyes, usually white with a colored iris, were blown wide. The pupils had dilated so fully that his eyes appeared to be solid black pits, absorbing the light of the bridge. His jaw was set so hard, the muscles bulged like steel cables in his neck. "Fire!" Korb shrieked. "Kill him!" The mercenaries opened up. A wall of blue plasma energy erupted toward the doorway. Jax did not take cover. He charged. The hydraulic servos of the loader whined a high-pitched scream of overstressed machinery. He moved faster than a man wearing half a ton of steel should be able to move. He raised the left mechanical arm, using the thick plating of the clamp as a shield. Plasma bolts splashed against the yellow metal, melting it, turning it to slag. But Jax kept coming. A bolt slipped past his guard. It struck his right shoulder. The exposed flesh, the smell of cooking meat filled the air instantly. The impact should have spun him around. It should have sent him into shock. It should have made him scream. Jax did not even blink. His nervous system, flooded with a lethal cocktail of adrenaline, cortisol, and endorphins, had simply deleted the concept of pain. The signal went to his brain, and his brain marked it as irrelevant data. Sari watched him, and her breath hitched in her throat. Through her Phalis vision, she could see the aura of living things. Usually, rage was a jagged red, fear was a sickly yellow, love was a warm gold. But Jax was not red. He was gray. It was a flat, static, monochromatic gray. It was the color of a shark's eyes before it bites. It was the color of a storm cloud that had stopped moving. It was the total, absolute absence of fear, mercy, hesitation, and humanity. It was the gray rage, a state of being where the higher functions of the brain shut down, leaving only the primitive, reptile stem to pilot the body with chilling efficiency. He is not angry, Sari thought, a shiver chasing itself down her spine. He is erased. Jax slammed into the first line of defense. He didn't use the mechanical clamps to crush. He used the momentum. He swung the left arm of the loader like a battering ram. The heavy steel struck a mercenary in the chest. The alien's armor didn't just crack, it disintegrated. The mercenary was launched across the room, hitting the far bulkhead with a wet thud. The stone man, Grohl, roared. He was the heavy hitter. 8 feet of living rock. He charged Jax, lowering his shoulder to tackle the human. In a contest of strength, even with the loader, The stone man might have won. But Jax was not fighting with strength. He was fighting with geometry. As Grohl lunged, Jax dropped. The hydraulics hissed as he forced the machine into a slide. He went under the stone man's guard. Jax's hand, his human hand. Not the clamp, snatched a fallen pulse pistol from the floor. He didn't shoot Grohl in the head. The rock skin there was 6 inches thick. He didn't shoot him in the chest. Jax jammed the barrel of the pistol directly into the soft, cartilage-like joint behind Grohl's knee. "Sit," Jax rasped. He pulled the trigger. The plasma bolt didn't have to penetrate rock. It vaporized the joint fluid and severed the tendon. Grohl didn't roar this time. He shrieked a high, glass-shattering sound as his leg collapsed backward at a sickening angle. The giant fell like a demolished tower. Jax didn't finish him. He used Grohl's falling body as a step. He planted one metal-shod foot on the stone man's back and launched himself over the barricade toward the command dais. He landed with a crash that cracked the floor tiles. The hydraulic loader was smoking now, the joints fusing from the heat, but it held for one last push. Korb backed up until he hit the main console. He hauled Sari up in front of him, jamming the muzzle of his heavy cannon under her chin. "Stop!" Korb screamed. His voice cracked, high and desperate. "One step, one more step, and I paint the ceiling with her." The bridge fell silent. The only sound was the hissing of the overheated hydraulic suit and the wet, ragged sound of Jax's breathing. Jax stood 5 meters away. He slowly straightened up. The mechanical arms of the loader hung at his sides, dripping hot oil. His chest heaved, rising and falling in a rhythm that was too slow for the exertion he had just expended. He looked at Korb. Then, his black eyes flicked to Sari. "Are you hurt?" Jax asked. His voice sounded like 2 grinding stones. It was flat, devoid of intonation. "I am fine," Sari said softly. She looked into those empty black eyes and projected a single thought through bond. Calculation. Korb laughed, but it was a hysterical, wet sound. "You lose. Human, you see this? This is a Class 9 plasma cannon. The trigger is hair-sensitive. My pulse is 180. If my hand shakes, she dies. If you move, she dies. If you breathe too loud, she dies." Jax looked at the gun. Then he looked at Korb's hand. "You are shaking." Jax noted. It was an observation, not an insult. "I am the commander of the Void Reapers," Korb shouted, trying to summon his courage. "Drop the exoskeleton. Get on your knees, or I swear by the abyss, I will kill her." Jax's right hand moved. It was a small movement. He reached into one of the pouches on his tattered utility belt. "What are you doing?" Korb shrieked. "Hands where I can see them." Jax pulled his hand out. He was holding a single, stainless steel bolt. It was a 3-inch hex bolt he had unscrewed from the ventilation shaft earlier. He held it between his thumb and forefinger. "You think you can bribe me?" Korb sneered. "With a piece of scrap." "No," Jax said. Sari closed her eyes. She felt the spike in Jax's mind. It wasn't anger. It was mathematics. Distance 5.2 meters. Atmospheric density standard. Gravity fluctuating 0.8. Target velocity required 140 meters per second. Jax did not throw like a biological entity. A biological entity throws with the shoulder and the elbow. Jax threw the exoskeleton. He engaged the servo in the right arm of the suit. The hydraulic piston compressed, storing kinetic energy. "Catch," Jax whispered. His arm snapped forward. It happened too fast for the reptilian eye to follow. One moment, the bolt was in Jax's hand. Next, there was a metallic ping. The bolt flew through the air faster than a low-velocity bullet. It didn't hit Korb. It didn't hit Sari. It struck the open cooling vent on the side of Korb's plasma cannon. The tolerance of a Class 9 weapon is microscopic. The bolt jammed into the slide mechanism just as Korb's finger tightened on the trigger in a reflex reaction to the movement. The gun tried to fire. The energy built up in the chamber. The slide tried to recoil to vent the heat. The bolt stopped it. Crack fizz. The weapon backfired. It didn't explode, but the safety mechanism engaged violently. venting superheated steam backward into Corb's hand and locking the trigger. Corb screamed, dropping the useless weapon as the steam scalded his scales. That 1 second of distraction was all Jax needed. He triggered the leg pistons. He crossed the 5 meters in 2 strides. It was like watching a train derailment in fast forward. Corb tried to push Sari away and draw his backup knife, but Jax was already there. Jax didn't punch him. He slammed the full weight of the exoskeleton plus his own 200 pounds of dense muscle into Corb. He led with his shoulder. The impact was catastrophic. Corb's ceramic chest armor, designed to stop lasers, shattered like a dinner plate dropped on concrete. Ribs snapped. The breath was driven out of his body in a violent whoosh. They flew backward, crashing into the main navigation console. The console sparked and died as Corb's body crushed the interface. Jax didn't stop. He grabbed Corb by the throat with his left hand, the human hand, and lifted him off the deck. He slammed him against the reinforced glass of the viewport, looking out into space. Thud. Corb hung there, feet dangling, clawing at Jax's wrist. His eyes were bulging. He couldn't breathe. The human's grip was like a hydraulic vice. Jax leaned in. His face was inches from Corb's. The oil and blood on Jax's skin smeared onto Corb's pristine officer's uniform. "You made a mistake," Jax whispered. Corb wheezed, black blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. I surrender. Prisoner of war. Rights." Jax ignored him. He shifted his grip, pinning Corb against the glass with his forearm. With his free hand, he reached up and tapped the glass of the viewport. "Look," Jax said. Corb rolled his eyes, terrified. "What?" "The glass," Jax said. He pointed to a tiny scratch on the surface of the viewport, likely caused by the impact of Corb's head. "You scratched the cage," Jax said. His voice was deadpan, a dry desert of humor that was infinitely more terrifying than a scream. "My wife hates looking through dirty glass. She has very high standards." Corb stared at him, his mind unable to process the absurdity of the statement in the face of such violence. You are insane." "I am a married man," Jax corrected. "Same thing." He pulled his arm back. He didn't hit Corb. He simply let go. Corb slid down the glass, collapsing into a heap on the floor, gasping for air, clutching his shattered chest. He was broken, not just physically, but psychologically. He had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had made a joke about window cleaning. Jax turned away. The gray was still there, pulsing in his veins. But the threat was neutralized. He walked over to the command chair where Sari was standing. She hadn't moved. She was watching him with a look that was a complex mixture of adoration, relief, and profound sadness. Jax looked at the control panel next to her. It was the locking mechanism for the bridge restraints. He didn't ask for the code. He grabbed the metal casing of the panel with his bare hands. The veins in his biceps bulged as he applied torque. Screech! He ripped the entire panel off the mounting, wires sparking and snapping. The magnetic locks on the bridge doors disengaged with a heavy clunk. "You are free," Jax said. He stood there, swaying slightly. The adrenaline was peaking, and soon came the crash. His breathing was ragged. Sari took a step toward him. "Jax," she said softly. He flinched. His hands, still curled into fists, trembled violently. The exoskeleton creaked as the servos cooled. "Do not touch me," Jax rasped, stepping back. He looked at his hands, covered in blood and grease. I am dirty. I am still hot. The reactor, it hasn't spun down yet." He was warning her. The gray rage didn't just switch off. It was a biological fire. If she touched him now, his instincts might mistake the movement for an attack. Sari didn't listen. She walked right up to him. She didn't reach for his hands. She reached up and placed her palms on his cheeks, ignoring the grime, ignoring the heat radiating from his skin like a furnace. "Look at me," she commanded. Her voice used the felis tone of absolute authority. Jax's black eyes locked onto hers. "I see you," she whispered. I see the gray. But I am not the enemy. I am the reason. She pushed her forehead against his. She opened the bond wide, flooding his mind not with fear, but with a cool blue wave of calm. It was the psychic equivalent of plunging a red-hot iron into a bucket of ice water. Come back, she projected. The hunt is over. The door is fixed. The monsters are gone. Jack shuddered. A long, shuddering gasp left his chest. The blackness in his pupils began to recede, shrinking back to normal size, revealing the warm, brown irises underneath. The tension in his shoulders collapsed, the monster evaporated, and the man returned. His knees buckled. The exoskeleton was heavy, and without the hysterical strength to support it, it was a crushing weight. Sari caught him. She couldn't hold his weight, but she guided him down as he slid to the floor, his back resting against the captain's chair. He sat there, legs sprawled, the yellow machine bulky and awkward around him. He looked down at Corb, who was moaning softly on the floor. Then he looked at the stone man, who was unconscious. "Did I do that?" Jax asked. His voice was weak, the gravel gone, replaced by exhaustion. "Yes," Sari said, kneeling beside him and wiping a smear of oil from his forehead with her thumb. "You were very efficient. I think I broke my hand," Jax mumbled, looking at his swollen knuckles. "And my ribs, again." "We will fix them," Sari said. "We always do." From the floor, Corb coughed. He tried to push himself up, but his arms gave out. He looked at the human, this battered, broken, bleeding creature that had just dismantled his entire crew single-handedly. "What?" Corb wheezed, blood flecking his lips. "What? Are you... You are not a mechanic?" Jax leaned his head back against the chair. He closed his eyes. He was too tired to explain evolution, or death worlds, or the terrifying capacity of the human endocrine system. He just reached out and took Sari's hand. "I told you," Jax whispered, a small, tired smile touching his lips. "I am her husband." Sari squeezed his hand. "And," she added, looking at Corb with eyes that were cold as hard vacuum, "you should have checked the warranty before you tried to steal the wife of a human engineer." "Why?" Corb gasped. "Because," Sari said, "engineers are the only ones who know how to take things apart." The bridge fell silent, save for the rhythmic ping of the cooling exoskeleton and the distant wail of the approaching Galactic Union sirens. The Galactic Union patrol cruiser, the Adjudicator, did not arrive with a subtle knock. It arrived with the authority of a collapsing star, dropping out of warp speed directly off the port bow of the Gilded Cage. Captain Valerius stood on the bridge of the patrol ship, looking at the mercenary vessel on the main view screen. The Gilded Cage looked like it had been chewed on by a cosmic leviathan. The hull plating near the engine room was buckled outward. There were scorch marks around the airlocks, and the ship was drifting, listing lazily to the left, its gyroscopic stabilizers clearly offline. "We are receiving a distress beacon," the communications officer reported. "It is not using standard encryption. It is coming from a personal comms unit. ID belongs to Rick's a technician." "What is the message?" Valerius asked, smoothing the front of his pristine blue uniform. "The message is just one word. Captain, monster." Valerius frowned. "Boarding parties 1 and 2. Prep for hard contact. I want full suppression gear. If the Void Reapers are calling for help, whatever is on that ship is worse than they are." The boarding tubes extended, latching onto the mercenary ship's airlock with a metallic groan. The seals pressurized. The blast doors hissed open. Valerius led the way, his pulse rifle raised. He expected resistance. He expected plasma fire, traps, and the chaotic shouting of battle. Instead, he found silence. The corridors of the Gilded Cage were bathed in the dying red light of the emergency strobes. The floor was slick with fire suppression foam and hydraulic fluid. They moved deeper into the ship. In the mess hall, they found 4 Grox mercenaries. They were not dead, but they were not fighting. They were zip-tied together with heavy-duty cargo straps. One had a broken leg splinted with a piece of pipe and duct tape. Another was unconscious, The third was staring at the wall, muttering something about ghosts in the vents. "Secure them," Valerius ordered, his unease growing. "Move to the bridge." The team approached the command deck. The blast door, a massive slab of titanium meant to protect the nerve center of the ship, was lying on the floor. It was bent in half, resembling a piece of paper that someone had crumpled in frustration. Valerius stepped over the ruined metal and entered the bridge. The scene inside was not a standoff. It was domesticity amidst the apocalypse. Jax was sitting on the edge of the ruined captain's console. He had stripped off the remains of the yellow hydraulic exoskeleton, which lay in a smoking heap in the corner. He was shirtless, his torso a roadmap of bruising and lacerations. He held a small, silver packet of emergency nutrient paste in one hand, eating it with mechanical efficiency. Sari stood behind him. She had found a medical kit. Her long, elegant fingers were moving gently over his back, applying a synthesis of healing gel to a deep burn on his shoulder. She was humming a soft, low tune, a Phalis lullaby meant to calm cubs during a thunderstorm. Corb, the fearsome leader of the Void Reapers, was curled up in the corner of the room, far away from the human. He was clutching his chest, his breathing wheezy and wet. "Galactic Union," Valerius shouted, aiming his weapon at Jax. "Hands where I can see them." Jax stopped chewing. He swallowed slowly. He didn't raise his hands. He just looked at Valerius with tired, brown eyes. "They are sticky," Jax said, holding up his hands. They were covered in blue gel and dried blood. "I do not want to get your floor dirty." "I said hands up," Valerius barked. "Step away from the female. You are under arrest for—" Valerius looked around the room, at the destroyed equipment, the shattered glass, and the unconscious stone man groaning by the wall. "For everything. Assault, piracy, massive destruction of property." "He did not do it," Corb screamed from his corner. Valerius turned to the mercenary leader. "You are defending him. Corb, that is a change of pace." "Defending him." Corb spat a mouthful of violet blood onto the deck. "I am accusing him. Look at him. He is not a man. He is a machine. He ate my heavy gunner." "I did not eat him," Jax corrected calmly, wincing as Sari applied gel to a cut on his neck. "I threw him into a supply closet. He is napping." "He tore the blast door off its hinges," Corb shrieked, his voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "He walked through plasma fire. He is a biological weapon. Arrest him. Kill him. Just get him away from me." Valerius looked back at Jax. The human looked unremarkable. He was muscular, yes, and scared. But he didn't look like a super soldier. He looked like a tired mechanic who had had a very long day. "Check the female," Valerius ordered his medical officer. "She might be suffering from Stockholm Syndrome, or shock." The medical officer, a logical, blue-skinned Duros named Dr. Aaron, stepped forward with a handheld scanner. "Ma'am, I need to scan you for injuries and identification." Sari looked at Jax. Jax gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I am fine," Sari said, her voice composed. "But you can scan." Dr. Aaron ran the blue beam of light over Sari. The scanner chirped, then it beeped. Then it began to emit a frantic, high-pitched wail that cut through the silence of the bridge like a knife. The screen of the scanner flashed red. "Alert! Alert! Class 0 signal detected." "What is it?" Valerius demanded. "Is she carrying a bomb?" Dr. Aaron stared at the readout, his eyes widening. He backed away from Sari slowly. "Captain, it is not a bomb. It is the necklace." Valerius looked. Around Sari's slender green neck sat a piece of jewelry that Corb had ignored, a simple, thick band of silver metal with a pulsating blue crystal in the center. Corb had assumed it was a slave collar or a trinket. "It is a control device," Dr. Aaron whispered, "but the biosignature is wrong. It is not synced to her nervous system." "Who is it synced to?" Valerius asked. Dr. Aaron turned the scanner toward Jax. The device screamed again, the two signals locking together in perfect synchronization. "It is synced to him," Aaron said. "It is a biological stabilizer, Military grade, prohibited tech from the Terra-Xenon War. Valerius lowered his rifle slightly. Confusion warring with instinct. A stabilizer for what? For Project Zero, Aaron said, the words heavy in the air. Silence fell over the bridge. Even Korb stopped whimpering. Project Zero is a myth, Valerius said. The Human Federation claimed they destroyed all the prototypes after the peace treaty of Orion. They destroyed the files, Jack said. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the room. They didn't destroy the people. Jack stood up. Sari kept her hand on his shoulder, her touch light, but grounding. I was not born, Jack said, looking at his hands. I was decanted, Vat grown. Genes spliced with regenerative traits from the Saurians and adrenal boosters from the apex predators of Death World 4. They wanted a soldier who could fight for 3 weeks without sleep, who could ignore pain, who could rip a tank hatch open with his bare hands. He looked at Valerius. They succeeded, but they made a mistake. They removed the inhibition centers of the brain to make us fearless. But without inhibition, there is no off switch. Once the adrenaline starts, it feeds on itself. It becomes a loop. We do not just fight until the enemy is dead. We fight until everything is dead. Valerius took a step back, his grip tightening on his weapon. You are unstable. I was, Jax agreed. That is why they were going to terminate me. After the war, I was too dangerous to be a civilian. I broke things. I hurt people because they startled me. He reached up and touched Sari's hand on his shoulder. Then I met her. Sari stepped forward, placing herself between the guns and her husband. The Phalis are natural empaths. Captain, you know this. We can sense emotion, but my connection with Jax is not just sensory, it is structural. She tapped the silver collar on her neck. This is not jewelry, it is a psionic amplifier. It takes my brainwaves, my calm, my reason, my love, and it broadcasts them directly into his limbic system. I am his inhibition. I am his conscience. I am the wall that keeps the monster in the cage. Korb stared at them, his jaw dropping. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. I separated you, Korb whispered. I put you in the containment cell, the shielding. It blocked the signal. Yes, Sari said coldly. You did not steal a prize. Korb, you pulled the pin on a grenade. When you took me away, the signal faded. The silence came back. And when the silence comes, the gray rage follows. The gray rage, Dr. Aaron muttered, reading the file scrolling on his datapad. Total emotional detachment, hysterical strength. The subject becomes a biological automaton dedicated to the elimination of the threat. No mercy, no pain, no limit. You are lucky, Jack said to Korb. If the ship had been bigger, if it had taken me 5 minutes longer to get to the bridge, the stabilizer would have reset completely. I would not have just broken your ribs. I would have dismantled you to see how you worked. Valerius looked at Jax, then at Korb, then at the ruined door. The narrative of the scene shifted instantly. This wasn't a crime scene. It was a containment breach. Captain, Valerius said to his team, lower weapons. Sir, a trooper asked. He is a walking war crime. He is a symbiotic pair. Class 1, Valerius corrected, holstering his rifle. According to Galactic Law Section 4 Alpha, separating a Project Zero subject from their anchor is an act of planetary endangerment. If we arrest him, we have to separate them. If we separate them in a confined space like my ship, he will kill all of us. Valerius turned to Korb. The mercenary looked small and pathetic now. Korb of the Void Reapers, Valerius announced, his voice booming. You are under arrest. Me? Korb shrieked. I am the victim. Look at my ship. Look at my chest. You are under arrest for the activation of a prohibited weapon of mass destruction, Valerius said. You kidnapped the safety mechanism of a living nuke. You risked the lives of everyone in this sector because you didn't bother to scan for a neural link. That is gross negligence and reckless endangerment on a galactic scale. Get him out of here, Valerius ordered. 2 troopers hauled Corb to his feet. As he was dragged past Jax, Corb flinched, curling in on himself as if expecting a blow. Jax didn't move. He didn't even look at Corb. He was looking at Sari. "Are we done?" Jax asked her. "I am hungry. The nutrient paste tastes like chalk." "We are done," Sari said, stroking his cheek. Valerius cleared his throat. "Mr. Vance? Mrs. Vance? We will escort you back to Cios Prime. We will tow your vehicle." He gestured to the ugly, modified escape pod still welded to the hull. "Thank you," Jack said. "Please be careful with the pod. I haven't paid off the aftermarket thrusters yet." The shuttle ride back to the surface of the planet was quiet. Jack sat by the window, watching the stars streak by. He had been cleaned up by the medics on the patrol ship, his ribs taped, his shoulders set in a brace. He wore a fresh flight suit provided by the Union, though it was tight across the shoulders. Sari sat opposite him. She wasn't looking at the stars. She was looking at him. The necklace hummed softly, a reassuring vibration in the air. "You are staring," Jack said, not turning his head. "I am admiring," Sari corrected. "You held the ship together. Jax, literally, Rix told the police you manually held the gravity coupling for 3 minutes while the engine spun down. That should have ripped your arms off." "It was heavy," Jax admitted. He turned to look at her. The dark, terrifying void was gone from his eyes, replaced by the warm, crinkled corners of a man who smiled rarely, but meant it when he did. "But I knew you were upstairs. I couldn't let you fall." Sari reached across the aisle and took his hand. His knuckles were bruised, the skin rough and calloused. "They are going to monitor us now," Sari said. "The Union, now that they know what you are, they will have drones watching the house. They will check the signal on the necklace every hour." "Let them watch," Jack shrugged. "Maybe they will learn how to fix a fence properly. The drone they sent last week crashed into my azalea bush." He squeezed her hand. "As long as they don't try to take it off." "They won't," Sari said fiercely. "I told the captain, if anyone tries to take this necklace, or take you, I will not need the gray rage. I will scratch their eyes out myself." Jax chuckled. It was a dry, rusty sound. "I believe you." He looked out the window again as the shuttle broke through the atmosphere of Cios Prime. The clouds parted, revealing the green jungles and the blue oceans of their home. It was peaceful. It was quiet. "Hey," Jack said after a moment. "Yes." "The door," Jack said, a thoughtful expression on his face. "On the bridge." "The titanium blast door you folded like a napkin?" Sari asked, her tail flicking with amusement. "Yeah, that one." Jax frowned slightly. "Do you think I was too dramatic? I could have just cut the lock. I had the plasma cutter." Sari laughed. It was a bright, musical sound that filled the small cabin. "Jax, you walked into a room full of armed mercenaries wearing a yellow forklift, ripped a door off its hinges, and threw a bolt at a gun to jam it. It was very dramatic." She leaned forward and kissed his battered knuckles. "But," she whispered, her eyes glowing with that soft, warm gold of pure affection, "I liked how you fixed it. It was very definitive." Jack smiled. He leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes. The adrenaline was finally gone, leaving a heavy, comfortable exhaustion. The monster was asleep. The engineer was off duty. The husband was going home. Narrator's voice. The file on the desk of the High Counselor of the Galactic Union was stamped with a red Class 1 warning seal. The Counselor, a fluid-form shapeshifter, sighed and opened the dossier. It was titled Human Pair Bonding and Threat Assessment, the Project Zero Anomaly. It contained the autopsy reports of the mercenary team's equipment, not the mercenaries themselves, who were mostly just broken, not dead. It contained the testimony of Commander Valerius, and it ended with a new directive for all guild operations in human-occupied space. Directive 99, Alpha. Do not engage human family units. Do not leverage human spouses as hostages. The counselor read the final note from the field analyst. We assumed the human was the pet. We assumed the collar was for control. We were wrong. The human is the weapon, the collar is the safety catch, and the love. The love is the only thing standing between us and an extinction event. The counselor closed the file and looked out the window at the swirling galaxy. They didn't know, the counselor murmured to the empty room. They thought he was just a man. But out in the jungle of Sios Prime, in a small house with a well-maintained fence and a newly planted azalea bush, Jax was not a weapon, and Sari was not an anchor. They were just two people, sitting on the porch, listening to the rain, safe in the knowledge that the monsters in the dark were terrified of them, and that was exactly how they liked it.